Imagine a city ripped in half overnight. Families torn apart, lives frozen, a nation held captive by a wall of concrete and barbed wire. For 28 long years, it stood as the ultimate symbol of division, a brutal scar on the face of freedom. But what happens when the silent whispers of change become an unstoppable roar? When courage meets concrete, and the most feared barrier on earth finally crumbles. Prepare to relive the night that changed the world. Feel the tension, the fear, and the ultimate euphoria of a people claiming their freedom. This is the untold story of the Berlin Wall's rise and its incredible, unexpected fall. If you're ready for an epic journey through one of history's most pivotal moments, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to experience every part of this powerful series. The summer of 1961 had been deceptively calm in Berlin. The city, scarred but resilient after the war, buzzed with a precarious dual existence. In the west, neon lights flickered over bustling markets, jazz music drifted from smoky clubs, and the currency was strong, backed by the promise of Western prosperity. In the east, the avenues were wide and stern, lined with socialist realism architecture. The shops sparsely stocked, and the air heavy with the pervasive presence of the German Democratic Republic, or GDR, and its Soviet patrons. Every day, thousands flowed between these two worlds. East Berliners seeking better jobs or a taste of freedom in the West. West Berliners visiting relatives or simply crossing a line that, for all its ideological weight, still felt porous. But beneath this fragile normality, the tension had been building for years, an ideological fault line threatening to crack wide open. Since 1949, the GDR had been bleeding its brightest and best. Doctors, engineers, teachers, skilled laborers, over 2.7 million people had fled to the West, a staggering exodus that threatened to cripple the young socialist state. The Soviet Union, increasingly frustrated by this gaping wound in its Iron Curtain, demanded action. The West, particularly the encircled city of West Berlin, became a beacon, a shining symbol of freedom, tantalizingly close, yet strategically vulnerable. The night of August 13, 1961, shattered the illusion of a single city forever. Under the cloak of darkness, while most Berliners slept, GDR soldiers and workers, backed by Soviet tanks, began to unroll barbed wire and erect makeshift barricades. Streets were torn up, tram lines severed, and the city's arteries brutally clamped shut. Families were literally cut in half, husbands separated from wives, children from parents, often while one was visiting the other side. A simple, hasty barrier of wire quickly morphed into something far more sinister. The Berlin Wall was being born. The initial shock gave way to a chilling reality. Concrete blocks replaced barbed wire. Watchtowers sprouted from the ground, manned by armed guards. A grim death strip emerged, a barren no-man's land, littered with anti-vehicle obstacles and patrolled by vicious dogs. This wasn't just a border, it was a fortification of fear, designed not to keep enemies out, but to imprison a nation. Life in West Berlin transformed overnight. The vibrant, open city became an island, surrounded by a hostile communist sea. Its citizens felt abandoned, vulnerable, yet fiercely defiant. The American president, John F. Kennedy, famously declared in 1963, "Ich bin ein Berliner," a powerful statement of solidarity that resonated deeply with the encircled populace. West Berlin became a symbol of Western resilience, a capitalist outpost behind enemy lines, its existence a constant thorn in the side of the GDR. Meanwhile, in East Berlin, the atmosphere was one of suffocating control. The wall was officially hailed as an anti-fascist protection rampart, guarding against Western aggression, but everyone knew its true purpose. The pervasive presence of Stasi, the secret police, ensured conformity. Neighbors watched neighbors. Whispers carried grave risks. The once bustling train stations became ghost towns, the routes severed. Travel to the west was virtually impossible, reserved only for the most loyal and trusted or those granted special rare permits. The promise of socialism was slowly replaced by the grim reality of a closed society. The human cost was immediate and devastating. Countless families found themselves separated by an impassable barrier. A husband working in the West might never see his family in the East again. A student might be forever cut off from their university. Attempts to cross became acts of desperate courage, often ending in tragedy. People tried to tunnel under it, swim across the Spree River, or even fly over it in homemade balloons. Many succeeded, often dramatically, but many more were caught, imprisoned, or shot dead by border guards, their bodies left in the death strip as a brutal warning. For nearly 3 decades, the wall stood as a concrete embodiment of the Cold War, a stark physical representation of the ideological divide between East and West. It wasn't just a barrier of concrete and wire. It was a scar on the soul of a nation, a daily reminder of a freedom denied, and a constant, silent scream of defiance for those who dreamed of a unified Germany. The city of Berlin, once a vibrant whole, became 2 disparate halves, an island of freedom surrounded by a suffocating embrace of control. And for 28 long years, the world watched, wondering if this brutal division would ever end. For decades, the Berlin Wall stood as an unyielding testament to Soviet power, a tangible symbol of the Iron Curtain that divided a continent. Life in East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, GDR, settled into a grim routine of shortages, surveillance, and a profound lack of personal freedom. Yet, beneath the veneer of socialist stability, a deep dissatisfaction festered. People longed for the basic liberties enjoyed by their Western neighbors, the freedom to travel, to speak, to simply be. This discontent, though often suppressed, was a smoldering ember that would eventually ignite. In the vast Soviet Union, a new wind began to blow. Mikhail Gorbachev, who rose to power in the mid-1980s, introduced policies of perestroika, restructuring, and glasnost, openness. His reforms were intended to revitalize the stagnant Soviet system, but they inadvertently lit a fuse across the entire Eastern Bloc. The rigid ideological grip began to loosen, and Moscow's unwavering support for its satellite states started to waver. This shift sent ripples of hope and alarm through the Eastern European capitals. The first cracks in the seemingly impenetrable facade appeared not in Berlin, but in other parts of the Soviet sphere. In Poland, the Solidarity Trade Union, brutally suppressed years earlier, resurfaced with renewed vigor, pushing for democratic reforms. Its success was a powerful beacon, demonstrating that popular will could challenge authoritarian rule. Then, in the summer of 1989, Hungary made a groundbreaking decision. It dismantled its fortified border with Austria. This seemingly localized act was a seismic event, creating the first tangible hole in the Iron Curtain. Suddenly, East Germans on holiday in Hungary had an escape route to the west. The trickle of refugees quickly became a flood. Thousands of East Germans poured into Hungary, then Czechoslovakia, seeking passage to West Germany via open borders or West German embassies. The images of these desperate individuals, abandoning everything for freedom, were broadcast globally, a powerful indictment of the GDR's repressive regime. This massive exodus was not just an embarrassment. It was a direct challenge to the very legitimacy of the East German state. Back within the GDR, the murmur of discontent swelled into a roar. Weekly Monday demonstrations began in Leipzig, growing from a few hundred brave souls to tens of thousands. People marched not with weapons, but with candles and chants, demanding "Wir sind das Volk," we are the people, and Reisefreiheit, freedom to travel. These peaceful protests, once unthinkable, spread to other cities, including East Berlin. The regime of Erich Honecker, entrenched in its rigid ideology, was caught flat-footed. It clung to the old ways, dismissing the protests as the work of Western agitators, even as the walls of its own power began to shake. The whisper of change had become a collective shout, echoing through the streets, pushing against the concrete and barbed wire of a divided nation. The world watched, sensing that something monumental was about to give. By the autumn of 1989, the pressure on the East German regime had become immense, both from within and without. The trickle of refugees through Hungary's newly opened border had swelled into a torrent. East Germans, often on what they pretended were holiday trips, flooded into Budapest, then into West German embassies in Prague and Warsaw, desperately seeking passage to freedom. The images of thousands camping outside embassy gates, clutching their meager belongings, were a stark visual indictment of the GDR. These weren't dissidents. They were ordinary families, doctors and workers simply yearning for a life unburdened by restrictions. The situation became untenable. The GDR's diplomatic relations strained and its international reputation crumbled. Trainloads of these desperate individuals were eventually allowed passage to West Germany, but this only fueled the exodus, creating a dangerous cycle. Each departure highlighted the regime's weakness and encouraged more to leave. The state was bleeding its people, its vital workforce, at an alarming rate. Simultaneously, the Monday demonstrations within East Germany exploded in size and fervor. What began as small gatherings in Leipzig, rooted in peaceful prayer vigils, quickly mushroomed. By October, tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands, marched through the streets of Leipzig, Dresden, and crucially, East Berlin. Their chants were simple but revolutionary. "Wir sind das Volk," we are the people, a direct challenge to the party's claim of representing the workers, and "Keine Gewalt," no violence, a powerful plea for peaceful change that disarmed the authorities. The regime under the ailing hardliner Erich Honecker seemed paralyzed. They had prepared for suppression, even ordering troops into position, but the sheer number of protesters and their unwavering commitment to nonviolence made a Tiananmen Square-style crackdown incredibly risky. The world was watching, and Gorbachev's Soviet Union had made it clear it would not intervene to prop up failing communist regimes. The Iron Fist was hesitant. The air vibrated with a mix of fear and exhilarating hope. Every Monday, people risked their freedom, their jobs, their lives, simply by showing up. The crowds grew denser, their voices louder, their demands clearer. Reisefreiheit, freedom to travel. They wanted access to the West, not to destroy the GDR, but to breathe, to connect, to simply live a normal life. This wasn't a revolution born of ideology, but of basic human yearning. The path to freedom, once hidden and perilous, was slowly, agonizingly being forged by the relentless footsteps of a peaceful, determined people. The wall, for so long an unyielding symbol of division, now faced an irresistible tide of human will. By early November 1989, the East German regime, the Socialist Unity Party, SED, was in utter disarray. Erich Honecker had been ousted, replaced by Egon Krenz, but the leadership was struggling desperately to regain control amidst the escalating protests and the mass exodus of its citizens. They needed to offer concessions, a safety valve for the boiling frustration to prevent a complete implosion. The most pressing demand, echoing in every protest, was the freedom to travel. On November 9th, 1989, a crucial Politburo meeting was held. The leadership drafted new, highly complex travel regulations intended to allow some limited travel to the West, but only after applying for permits and undergoing bureaucratic processes. The intention was to control the flow, not to open the floodgates. However, the exact wording and implementation details were chaotic and poorly communicated. Later that evening, at a live televised press conference, Gunter Schabowski, a relatively new and ill-prepared Politburo spokesman, was tasked with announcing these new regulations. The atmosphere in the room was tense, the journalists eager for any news. Schabowski, fumbling through his papers, read out the prepared statement about the new travel rules. It was convoluted and lacked clarity. A journalist, Riccardo Ehrman from Italy, asked a crucial question. When does this come into force? Schabowski, visibly confused, hesitated. He had not been briefed on the immediate effective date, or perhaps he misunderstood the internal memo which stated it would be effective the next day. He improvised, stammering, and then uttered the fateful words that would change history. Das tritt nach meiner Kenntnis, ist das sofort unverzüglich. As far as I know, that is effective immediately, without delay. The words hung in the air, instantly picked up by the international press. West German television and radio, watched and listened to by almost everyone in East Berlin, immediately broadcast the news. The wall is open! The reports, though based on a misunderstanding of the actual, more restrictive regulations, were taken as gospel truth by millions. Within minutes, a ripple of excitement, then disbelief, then surging hope swept through East Berlin. People, initially hesitant, began to gather at the various border crossings, particularly at Bornholmer Strasse. They were skeptical, but the news seemed too definitive to ignore. Hundreds turned into thousands, then tens of thousands, pressing against the checkpoints, demanding passage. The crowds grew denser, their chants of Tor auf, open the gate, growing louder, a mixture of joyous anticipation and nervous tension. The border guards, caught completely off guard, had received no direct orders about opening the gates immediately. They were unbriefed, outnumbered, and deeply confused. They consulted their superiors who, in turn, had no clear instructions from a panicked and disorganized leadership. The situation was explosive. A small force of armed guards facing a massive, jubilant yet determined crowd. The fate of the wall, and indeed of the Cold War, now rested on the decision of a few bewildered officers, standing between a crumbling regime's last directives and an unstoppable wave of human will. The announcement, born of confusion and miscommunication, had ignited the final spark. The air at the Bornholmer Strasse border crossing crackled with an unbearable tension. On one side, thousands upon thousands of East Berliners, their faces a mixture of joyous disbelief and resolute determination, chanted, Tor auf! Tor auf! On the other, a handful of bewildered border guards, clutching their weapons, awaited orders that never came. Their commanding officer, Harald Jäger, a man suddenly thrust into the crucible of history, faced an impossible choice. Use force against his own people, or defy the very system he had served. The pressure became overwhelming. The crowd swelled, pushing gently but relentlessly against the barrier. There were no shouts of aggression, only an insistent collective will for freedom. Jäger, seeing the futility and danger of resistance and without any clear directives from above, made a decision that reverberated across the globe. At 10:45 p.m. on November 9, 1989, he gave the order. Open the barrier. The initial opening was a trickle, then a flood. A wave of humanity surged through the checkpoint, spilling into the streets of West Berlin. On the other side, West Berliners, watching the incredible scenes unfold on television, rushed to meet them. The atmosphere was indescribable. Tears flowed freely, strangers embraced, and bewildered, joyful faces pressed together in disbelief. It was a reunion centuries in the making, not just of a city, but of a nation, and a symbol of hope for a world longing for peace. The scenes at Bornholmer Strasse were quickly replicated at other crossings. Guards, seeing what had happened or simply overwhelmed by the sheer numbers, began opening gates all along the wall. People clambered onto the concrete barrier, dancing, cheering, their triumphant figures silhouetted against the floodlights. Some, seizing hammers and chisels, began to chip away at the hated symbol of oppression, creating the first tangible holes in its monolithic facade. The Mauerspekte, wall woodpeckers, began their work, an act of joyous destruction. The fall of the Berlin Wall was more than just the end of a physical barrier. It was the symbolic collapse of the Iron Curtain and a seismic shift in global geopolitics. Within a year, Germany would be reunified, a dream that once seemed impossible. The dominoes of communism in Eastern Europe began to fall, leading to the dissolution of the Soviet Union itself just 2 years later. The Cold War, which had held the world in a grip of fear for decades, was effectively over. Today, only fragments of the Berlin Wall remain, preserved as memorials and art installations. They stand as a stark reminder of a divided past, of the human cost of ideological conflict, and of the enduring power of hope and the unyielding desire for freedom. The night of November 9th, 1989, etched itself into the annals of history, a testament to the extraordinary power of ordinary people whose quiet demands for freedom ultimately brought down a seemingly impregnable barrier and reshaped the world. The Berlin Wall, once an impenetrable symbol of division, had crumbled under the weight of human longing.